Okay. Okay, my coffee. All right. So last week we did Shabbat, the positive mitzvah of Shabbat. We spoke about the obligation to have festive meals on Shabbat, to recite Kiddush, to sanctify the day, liturgically, while holding a glass of wine, to add solemnity and significance to that mitzvah, to have good food, to prepare for Shabbat by washing our clothes and washing ourselves and washing our homes, to have light in our homes over Shabbat, 2 loaves of challah Friday night, 2 loaves of challah again Saturday lunch, to have a third meal at some point Saturday afternoon, I think Havdalah at the end of Shabbat. This was all things we discussed last week. Hopefully those of you here, this is somewhat familiar from they haven't forgotten in the week. So this now, we're going to deal with all the negative prohibitions of Shabbat, because Shabbat, as I described it last week, is indeed, there's a positive celebration of the day, but the prohibitions are what allow us to carve out space to have that positive experience, okay? And it's through the prohibitions that we're able to kind of delineate and define. Come in. Fine. So that's what gives the day. It protects the day, right? Because we have busy lives, we have busy things, we do things, and we, through the restrictions of Shabbat, we carve out time. Welcome. You missed me saying that even though it says conversion curriculum on the top of the syllabus, that's not why everyone's here. And we're now, just the other thing I'll say, we're now in Roman numeral 2, letter B, okay? And people come to the class, I think I should use this every week, every time there's someone new, people come for as many months as they wish, and it sort of goes in a cycle. So there's no beginning, there's no end. I mean, there is a beginning and an end, but people can come wherever they want and stay for as long as they want, and eventually they'll start again. This is the second time I've gone through this since I've been here. So, okay. So last week was Zachor, the positive celebration of Shabbat, the positive observance of Shabbat. This week is Shamor, the restrictions of Shabbat that allow us to have space and time to carry out that, to have that sanctity. So what is that we're not supposed to do on Shabbat? So often people say we don't do work on Shabbat. That's a misconception, a misnomer. The Torah says we don't do melacha on Shabbat, which is a word that can be hard to define. It's some sort of like creative labor, creative effort, constructive, productive, creative labor, which is different from work. Okay, so it would be a difference, right? You can, I don't know, like schlepping furniture around your house would not be melacha. It's not violating one of these core prohibitions of Shabbat to, carry a couch from one across, from side of the room to the other and back and forth. Even though it's work, it's toil, okay? But Shabbat that's not what we're avoiding on Shabbat. It's not per se what we're avoiding. We're avoiding creative activity. And the rabbis in the Talmud delineate 39 categories of labor. They call 39 milachot, or they call it av milachot, 39 archetypes of work that are prohibited on Shabbat. And where do they get these 39 from? So in the description of, the word melacha appears 39 times, and in the Torah, when it describes the observance of Shabbat in the context of creating the Mishkan, creating the tabernacle. The Mishkan was this sacred space, the precursor of the temple, that was erected in the desert, and that was the central place of prayer and revelation as the Jewish people traveled through the desert, like their portable sanctuary. And the Torah explicitly says, when build it, but don't build it on Shabbat. So the rabbis derive from this that the things that were done to build the Mishkan, those are the things that we don't do on Shabbat. And so they figured out what the 39 types of activity that went into constructing the Mishkan were, and these are the things we don't do on Shabbat. That's one way to understand it. Really, I think the connection to the Mishkan, is literary, because the Torah describes the Mishkan. The creation of the Mishkan is parallel in the Torah to the creation of the world. God made the universe, and then the Jewish people is told, make a Mishkan, make a sacred space where God's presence will dwell in the Jewish people through the building of this structure, and that the language is very, very similar. It echoes the language in Genesis when God creates the earth. So there's God's creation of the earth, there's our creation of this space dedicated to serve God, and so God rests on the seventh day, and that's where Shabbat first appears in history, and then we refrain from building the Mishkan on Shabbat. The Torah says don't, juxtaposes the two commands to build the Mishkan, but not build it on Shabbat, and so that's another connection. Abram Joshua Heschel wrote a book called The Sabbath, which is a very much recommended book, and he calls the Sabbath a sanctuary in time. Okay? The Mishkan, the temple, was a sanctuary in space, a sacred place, And Shabbat is a sacred time. And so it's sort of that same idea of sacredness, of sanctity, of setting something off as being special, but not in the realm of space, but in the realm of time. So the 39 categories of labor that are then connected to the Mishkan in that way, they also are connected to, you could call civilization building, okay? Things that we do to create civilization. So what are they? There's a whole series of melachot, a series of archetype labors that all are leading up to making bread, right? Making bread, that's a fundamental, right? Fundamental need. It symbolizes, right, everything we do to sustain ourselves. So all the stages to bake bread, those are forbidden melachot. So what are the stages to bake bread? You start with plowing. Good.
Oh.
Right. What? Are you thinking flour water? That's plowing, and then harvesting, and then piling up your grain in a heap, and then threshing it, and then winnowing it, and then sifting it, and then grinding it, and then kneading the dough, and then baking it. That's 9. It means I'm forgetting something. I think there are a few more. What?
Mixing.
Grading is not melacha, no. Kneading is, what did I forget? I forgot one? Whatever, okay. If I forgot one or two, I mentioned most of them and that's it, okay? This is why I wish it wasn't recorded. Okay? We'll look it up later, okay. So, but you get the idea. Okay, the next series of melachot are the things needed to create clothing. So to create clothing, so setting up a loom, which is I think 2 different melachot, and then weaving on that loom. And then cutting your fabric, sewing. These are all things that are melachot. Also, if you're going to make clothing out of leather, so trapping an animal, skinning the animal, tanning the hides, working the leather, removing the hairs from the leather, and then the actual writing, and then erasing in order to write again. These are all things connected to clothing, leather work. Obviously, writing is also a civilization, all things that create meaning, create civilization, create society, all these activities. These are all archetypes, these are all categories of labor. And then also things that you do to build. So digging and actual building, connecting, screwing something in, like hammering, things that are connected to building. Erecting a tent. These are all melachot. There are 39. I don't list quite all 39, but there are 39 right now. There are 39. So these are 39 categories. Each of these categories has subcategories that fall within it. So, for example, with the trapping the animal, right? Trapping an animal is a melacha. Trapping an animal, then slaughtering the animal, and then skinning the animal. These are archetypes. So, within slaughtering an animal is doing anything that causes bleeding to a person or to, right? So you can't, you can't injure an animal. Or you can't injure yourself, right? Not that. Why would you want to injure yourself? Let's say, I don't know, for what would be a case with like if elective surgery, okay, right? You can't do that on Shabbat, okay? You don't cut anything that causes bleeding in that sort. You can't do on Shabbat. Flossing your teeth if it will lead to bleeding, okay? That would be a problem on Shabbat because the bleeding is a derivative of the slaughter of an animal. There's also another example would be like you don't thresh. Okay, threshing, you know what threshing is? Yeah. Threshing is when you take your wheat, and you have the wheat stalks and your kernels of grain, like all connected, and you sort of mush them together in such a way that the grains separate from the stalks. So it could be done where you have like an ox pulling like this big threshing thing that you stand on, and you kind of go over the grains, or you can do it maybe in some other method, I don't know, like stomping it or something like that. So it separates the kernels from the stalks. What else falls into that category is milking a cow. Okay, milking a cow is you're taking the thing that you want, you're separating it from the thing that it grew within. So that's like the definition of threshing, and so anything of that sort is also prohibited on Shabbat. Okay, that's also each of these melachot. There's like the general category has a general definition, and then there are derivatives. There are things that are sort of subcategories, and all of the derivatives, they're called toladot, like children, and the archetypes, they're called avot, the parents, okay, of these 39 categories of labor, which is, once the 39 categories plus the derivatives, you're, dozens and dozens of forbidden categories of labor. These are all understood to be biblical prohibitions. Not that they're actually mentioned in the Torah itself. The Torah is very broad in general. So don't do melacha, don't do creative labor. There's like, it says don't, light a fire. The fire shall not burn your homes on Shabbat. That's basically it. The Torah doesn't tell us much else about specific things we do and don't do on Shabbat. But the rabbis understood, based on these juxtapositions, based on the 39 times it says Milacha in the Torah, based on how the Mishkan, the tabernacle was built, they understood that these activities, these 39 categories and their derivatives are all biblical prohibitions. Okay, that's an important piece of rabbinic, jurisprudence and how halacha works. That things could have a Torah level force of authority, like the authority of this law is from the Torah, and in theory, in some theoretical construct, the punishments that the Torah delineates would be applicable for violating these rules, even though it's not explicit in the Torah. The Torah says observe Shabbat, the Torah says don't do melacha on Shabbat, and then the rabbis defined what that means based on their methods, based on tradition, their methods of reading, based on their traditions they received. Milking a cow, that's a biblical prohibition. In addition, there are also rabbinic extensions, like the rabbis also legislated additional rules beyond those rules. For example, you can't ride a horse on Shabbat lest you break off a branch to use as a stick to help hit your horse or guide your horse. So the thing that's the biblical prohibition is breaking a stick off a tree. That is a derivation of, which one? I'm only asking because I mentioned it. Not the threshing. No.
Separating.
Yeah, it's like the harvesting. Okay, right? When you plow, you plant, and the third one is you harvest. Right? Cutting something growing from the ground, cutting it off from the ground. That's the third in that series. So breaking off a stick would be a biblical prohibition. So the rabbi said don't ride horses because people who ride horses they tend to break off sticks to use as riding tools. So what if I already have one, or what if I wouldn't do that? It doesn't matter. That's how legislation works. The rabbis of the Talmudic era also made legislations, but those are rabbinic violations. So in understanding how Jewish law works, we talked about this maybe a month or two ago. The Torah itself explicitly gives us some rules. Then there's rabbinic interpretation of what the Torah says, which has the force of law. The authority is a Torah level law. We call this a deoraita, a biblical rule, even though it's not explicitly in the Torah. And then we have rabbinic legislation, which the source of authority is the Talmudic rabbis. We have to obey all of them, but they have different stringencies as well. So, and there might be certain leniencies that apply for rabbinic legislation that wouldn't apply for Torah level legislation. So this is, Shabbat is the context where this comes up a lot, because there's so many different, it's like a huge, vast system of rules. 39 categories of labor, the derivatives, the biblical definition, the rabbinic extensions, and so it's a sea of rules, but I think the sea of rules is really necessary, as I said at the beginning, to create that, to carve out that little sanctuary of time where we can sort of experience sacred time. Just as the temple, the sacred space needs rules and boundaries, and you have restrictions as you get nearer and nearer to a holy place. And such anything sacred, anything put aside and separate, it's the boundaries that create that sanctity and make something special. So too with time, the rules carve out this time that otherwise would be gone. So So on this sheet, definition of milacha. Okay, it's a task. Okay. The Mishkan is the method and goal. Okay, so method and goal, that's another important point. The Mishkan, this tabernacle was for the rabbis also a guide for defining what the melacha would look like in terms of its goal as well. It means in order to, what I mean by that is, for example, if you do a melacha, do a prohibited form of labor for a different goal than the goal that labor was done in the context of the Mishkan, you have not violated the Shabbat on a biblical level. For example, I mentioned shchita, shechting, killing an animal is a av melacha. That's a biblical violation. It's one of the archetype prohibited forms of labor in Shabbat. What's the purpose of killing animals in the context of the Mishkan? I told you 2 minutes ago. Clothes. You kill the animal because you want the animal itself for the skin. You're going to use the hides to write on, you're going to use the hides for clothing, whatever it might be. So the purpose of killing the animal is because you want the animal, right? You want the body to use for some purpose. What if you kill an animal because you don't want it to bite you, right? What if it's like a real scary spider, or it's a rat or something like that. It's a lion. You know, if you kill an animal not because you want to use its body for something, just because you don't want it to eat you, does that count? And so the answer is no, it doesn't count. That's not a biblical violation. So the biblical violation is if you do this same action for the same purpose, as was done in the context of the Mishkan or in its sort of original definition. So if you do the same action for a different reason, you haven't violated Shabbat on a different level. This comes up all the time. This is a source of major leniencies, because then once you do that action for a different purpose, you lower the threshold of the severity, of the authority of this prohibition from biblical to just rabbinic. Now it's only a rabbinic law. You haven't violated the Torah on a biblical level. You've merely, this is now just a rabbinic legislation. Just be careful, don't do that. And there are lots of leniencies for rabbinic legislation. For example, if the animal is frightening, for the sake of an animal that's going to bite you and hurt you, or bite you and be itchy, like a mosquito, so the rabbis didn't extend their legislation to cover cases like that. So once you're smushing a mosquito, not because you want to have this specimen for something to stuff or something to have on your wall, but you're killing the mosquito because you don't want it to bite you, so there's no longer a biblical prohibition. And the rabbinic prohibition of killing animals, even in those cases, doesn't extend to animals that are going to harm you in some way. So another example, milking a cow, I said, was a biblical violation. Do you remember why I said it was a derivation of? Separating the milk from the udder where it developed, which is akin to.
Like a tree.
Not a tree, no. Threshing. Threshing, where you're separating the grains from the stalks where they grew. So threshing. So milking a cow is like threshing. So, but why do you milk cows? Why do you thresh? You thresh because you want the grain. So why do you milk cows? You milk cows because you want the milk. So far, so good. That's a biblical violation. What if you milk a cow not because you want the milk, but why else would you milk a cow?
So it's pain.
Yes, I think also the same thing, right? So it's not to relieve the pain. If you don't milk a cow every day, it hurts a lot to the cow. It hurts the cow a lot. So if you milk the cow, not because you want the milk, but because you want to relieve the suffering of the cow, so that's not a biblical violation, because you're not milking the cow for the sake of the milk. You're milking the cow to relieve the suffering of the cow. So that's only a rabbinic violation. And for the sake of avoiding pain for the animals, we're allowed to violate this rabbinic decree, or the rabbis didn't extend their decree, their legislation, to cover a case where it caused suffering to an animal. So if you own a cow, whatever, you can milk it on Shabbat, but you don't drink the milk typically. Okay, the milk is it's actually in Israel, some of the more stricter dairy operations. That all the milk that's done on Shabbat, it's done automatically. They have machines now, and it's discarded. The milk is discarded. Others say, since you can milk it in permission, the milk can be sort of mixed in with all the other milk, and that's also okay. These are different standards of kashrut that you'll find in Israel, but that's the way this is done. Jewish dairy farms, which today only exist in Israel, but if you buy a cow, you can milk it on Shabbat in that way. And again, this comes up in all sorts of, maybe one more case. I'll tell you another case. Extinguishing a fire, I left that one out in my list earlier. Lighting a fire and extinguishing a fire are each prohibitions on Shabbat. Extinguishing the fire is actually only a biblical prohibition if the reason why you extinguish a fire is to create pecham, to create charcoal that you're going to use. So when would you do that? Like if you blow out the wick, and now you have a wick that's very easy to burn. Now you have a quick lighting wick. So blowing out the candle, now you have a quick lighting wick. That's a violation of Shabbat. That's a burning for the sake of, extinguishing for the sake of some productive cause. You've made something productive and useful. If you blow out the light for some other reason, like you want to go to sleep, or that is only a rabbinic violation. And if it's a sick person who needs to sleep, we're allowed to, that could be okay. That case is already in the Mishnah. That's one of the ways in which we learn this principle. Okay, so there are deraita violations of Shabbat. There are the Rabbanan definitions of Shabbat. Okay, the rabbinic extensions. So the rabbinic extensions could be things that don't meet the biblical standard, right? It's missing some element. Now here's another example. Right? If you do melacha, if you do work on Shabbat in a destructive way, there's nothing productive about it at all. Like you just tear up something in anger. You don't tear something in order to reconstruct it. You don't tear something to make something of a specific size. You tear something in anger. You tear something just in, just being destructive, okay? That is not a violation of Shabbat. If you, anything that you might do that could have been a violation of Shabbat, if you do it in a destructive rather than a constructive way, doesn't meet the biblical threshold. If you do something in an unusual and awkward way, like with your elbow maybe, or with your nose, if you use your nose to write with, okay? In ink or something you did, right? That would not be a biblical violation, even though...
No.
Is that like a shinui?
This is called a shinui, exactly. So this often comes up, right? So people maybe, you turn on the light with your toe or something like that. This is a shinui. So there's a question of how far this goes. There's a question how far, because it could, see, some would say, there's those who are strict and say that a light switch is never really any switch or button isn't really a shinui, because actually the work is done by pushing the button. If you push the button with your hand, or you push your button with your toe, or you push the button with your ear, like it's the same, the light's going to go on with the same ease and efficiency and speed once the button is pushed. So others who say no, like turning on the light switch or whatever with your elbow in some extenuating circumstance would be better. A more classic case would be writing with your left hand or your weaker hand, which for me, if I write with my left hand, it's very awkward. I can barely get the letters to come out. That would be a case where the actual performance of the action is less efficient and isn't done in as fluid a way. Writing with your foot, okay? Carrying something, like instead of carrying something in your hand, you carry something, in your sock. Okay, that's like not a normal way to carry. It's less efficient. It's less useful. That would be so that's no longer a biblical violation, only a rabbinic violation. And then for certain extenuating circumstances, we're allowed to violate these rabbinic rules. Something is temporary. It's not. So if you write in the steam on a mirror, okay, that's gonna, maybe you write in the sand, the water's gonna wash it away. Okay, that would be not a biblical violation. Because you haven't done anything that's lasting. So the point, right, the certain standard of the biblical definitions of labor requires certain intentionality, requires certain usefulness, a certain permanence. That's to be done with a certain sense of direction, and and if any of these are lacking, it becomes rabbinic. It's only rabbinically forbidden, meaning you can't do it anyway because the rabbis they legislated don't do those lesser serious things as well. But there are all sorts of extenuating circumstances where we might permit those types of rabbinic violations. Yes.
One thing that I think applies to me a lot is just wondering if you can hang up clothes or fold clothes or put dishes from the dishwasher, assuming that you're not turning anything on or whatever, for dishes from dishwasher and just into cupboard or whatever, things like that, but assuming that you don't need it for Shabbat, you don't need it for a later meal or...
So that is, it's actually not on my list of...
Just things that maybe you...
Sure, so that's called hachana. That's not on my syllabus, it should be. That's called hachana. One of the things we don't do on Shabbat, we don't prepare on Shabbat for after Shabbat. So in terms of clearing the table, or putting things in the dishwasher, you're not going to run the dishwasher, you can put the table things in the dishwasher. So there's some who see that this is actually understood to be different. You can see this in two different ways. There are those who are strict and would say, so Friday night you can clear the table because you're going to have your meal Saturday lunch. Of course, you clean the table, you can do your dishes in a Shabbat compliant way, which we'll talk about, because you're going to need the dishes again for the next day. But what about you finish with lunch, or you finish with shal shudas, your afternoon meal on Saturday afternoon? You're not going to need those dishes anymore until after Shabbat. There's some who say we don't clear the table after shal shudas because anything we do to clear the table would be prepared.
Yeah.
Others would say, and this is how my personality works, so that's sort of how I'm inclined to say, no, you're not preparing for tomorrow, you're just clearing the table. You're putting the things where they belong now on Shabbat. And where do dirty dishes belong on Shabbat? In the dishwasher, okay? That's, so I think that's why I would understand it, right? It is Shabbat, I have another hour left of Shabbat, dirty dishes go in the dishwasher. So if you're eating shal shudas and it goes right until Shabbat ends, so say Havdalah first before you clear the table. If even it's going to be 20 more minutes of Shabbat, so I think for those 20 minutes of Shabbat, you don't need to have dirty dishes all over the table. You can put them where they belong, which is stacked in the sink, or put them in the dishwasher, or whatever.
And you can run the water over them, cold water, pre-rinse.
You can wash them on Shabbat as long as you do it in a Shabbat compliant way, which we'll talk about. I think we'll go through the melachot, and we will not all of them, but the ones that are relevant for home life, and we'll sort of see.
So on that topic,
Mhm.
like let's say you have all this stuff out and you need the table. So you're preparing the table, but you're using the table Shabbat. So then that's in
That
a
must be
similar
fine.
vein, right? Because
Yes,
you have
yes,
just
good.
the one table, so you have
That's,
to.
that's another, yes, exactly. Exactly. Or that would even apply for something, even the next item is called muktzah. Muktzah is a rabbinic concept that things that have no Shabbat use, we shouldn't be moving around on Shabbat. But you can if you need your computer or your telephone or a screwdriver. There's no Shabbat use for it. You shouldn't be moving it around on Shabbat. But if it's on your couch and you're going to sit down, you can move it for that reason. That would be the reason to move it. Should we go through the list now? So we'll go through the list. Let me first show you some books, okay? This is a 2-volume book called Shmirat Shabbat. Shmirat Shabbat Yehilchot, the Laws of Shabbat, written by Yeshua Newerth. He died just a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Very authoritative, comprehensive guide to observing Shabbat. The book might be partially out of print, which is in English, which is really astounding because it's a real classic, a modern classic, one of the best sort of English guides to Shabbat. It's not a page turner that you would sit down and read cover to cover, I assume, but it's a book you would read, a chapter at a time, or has a very good index. You'd look up, as situations emerge, you look them up. Very, very worth owning, or borrowing from the shul or whatever. It does, however, seem to have this common flaw of many English language books about halakha, which is that they tend to be fairly strict. It seems that people who write or publish English halakha books feel they need to tend towards strictness. Often they'll have Hebrew footnotes, which will give lenient opinions. I've seen this many times. It's like a known phenomenon. The Hebrew footnotes will be lenient, and the English main text is very, very strict. In this case, he wrote, this book exists in Hebrew. It's a very popular Hebrew book. The English translation is stricter than the Hebrew translation, and the Hebrew edition, and the Hebrew edition, the second edition is stricter than the first edition. So it is what it is. It's still a very good book. I don't know if there's necessarily a better one that exists if you can find it, but it's not always easily available. So I'm just sort of mentioning that. This is a book not about Shabbat, it's about Pesach. I'm showing it to you because it's by Eliezer Melamed. He has a very popular series of books about Jewish law in Hebrew, and they are currently being translated into English. This book about Pesach is a phenomenal book about the laws of Passover. A 2-volume book just like this about Shabbat is being published, I think, in 4 or 5 months. So I strongly recommend it. I suspect it's going to be excellent. And he's very trusted in the Dati Leumi, the religious Zionist community in Israel. He's 10 volumes of this series of books of practical halakha, and if it's like this one, I think it's going to be excellent. So it's just he's not extremely lenient, but he's definitely not searching to be strict, and it's in English, so I would, when it comes out, I strongly recommend it, and the ones that they've published already, I think are probably decent and worthwhile. Just another example, here's a 1-volume book just on the laws of cooking and heating food, which is probably among the more complex areas of Shabbat observance, because you do it every week, you want to have nice food, you want to serve nice food on Shabbat, and the laws are fairly strict, and complicated, not so strict, but complicated. So this is a decent book. Rabbi Willig is also a little bit strict about some of these issues, but it's all these books, they're all reliable, okay? So if you're a little bit too strict in Hilchot Shabbat, it's not terrible, but if something seems onerous, come speak to me, and maybe there are more lenient opinions that you can rely upon. I'd say some areas of halakha, if you're too strict, it can really be a disaster. And with Shabbat, if you're too strict, it's usually not a disaster. You just, the stakes are not terribly high usually if you're too strict. It's a reliable book, it's a decent book. But when Rabbi Lamed's book comes out in English, I think it's going to be very, very good. There's some other books that are also in publication that can be very good as well. And finally, this is a children's book that I took from my kids right now, which goes through all the 39 categories and gives pictures of what they are. So that's really helpful to kind of remember them, because a lot of them pertain to things that we don't do anymore, right? Like agricultural techniques that are just not, tanning leather, whatever. We don't know what they are necessarily. So it's sort of helpful to get illustrations or something's helpful for those. The want to say one other thing about muktzah. Maimonides, when he writes about muktzah, again, things that which I find, sorry, throwing a lot of terms, and I'm kind of fat. Let me just, I'll pause for a minute. Questions or comments that anything I've said so far before I?
The only word I have heard before is
Shinui?
Shinui.
Okay, shinui means do something like differently. The shanot is like to change. Shinui means change, so it's do something in an unusual way. Okay, so. Thank you.
And is that only for halacha?
As opposed to
Or
what?
can be like a general?
Oh no, you could, yeah. They will use something.
It's not like a loophole.
No, it means change. It means change. There was a political party in Israel some years ago called Shinui. Okay, it meant change. Right, it's trying to.
Like an example, like I see people on Shabbat, like instead of tearing off a paper towel roll, they'll like use their fingers and knuckles and try to tear it. I don't even know if that's like permissible, but like that's what.
That would be what they're trying to do.
That's
Yeah.
what they're trying to do.
They're also trying to do something. They're also trying to avoid the perforations. I think, because if you use the perforations, that's like you're saying, because tearing is a malacha. If you tear, in a productive way, like you want something to be a specific size. So if you tear on the perforations, your paper towel roll, your toilet paper, or whatever, you're saying, I want like this. I want one square of paper towel. That's why I'm on the perforation. If you tear in between the perforations, you're saying, I don't really care what length is. I just want like a handful of paper towel to dry my thing. But so that's part of why maybe it's better. So look, the recommended course of action is to tear your paper towels before Shabbat, or to use napkins, or use dish towels. Okay, but if you in some situation you need to tear it, so that would be a better way to do it, not on the perforations, and maybe with your teeth. No, okay.
Pull it past people.
Or if two people do it together, if you have enough work that if two people do something that one person could do by him or herself, that's also not a biblical violation, because it's also kind of shinui. It's like not doing it in the normal way. Two people do something. That's
So can two people push a switch at the same time?
Push a what?
Like a switch?
Yeah. So that would be. I mean, again, if you had to, meaning none of these things we would do. These are all rabbinic violations, but for certain extenuating circumstances.
If you had to, it would be better to do it this
Yeah.
way.
Exactly. If a child does it, if you use your nose, if you have two people do it together, all things for like and really in each case by case, like what is the what are you coming up against? What's the alternative value? Like if I don't push the elevator button, together with my husband, we'll have to spend all of Shabbat on the 50th floor of our hotel in wherever, like push. I think I would say push with two of you together and have a nice Shabbat afternoon. Like if you're going to lose the mitzvah of owning Shabbat, having an enjoyable Shabbat, I think I would do that. That's also because I think pushing the elevator to begin with is not a terribly serious violation. So it depends on also what the Shabbat restriction is and what the countervailing value is. Yes?
Is that still better than to try to indirectly ask someone to push it for you, or like hope that you can hop on with someone?
Like someone not Jewish who's going up in the elevator.
Right.
It depends on the situation.
That's actually quite easy to do sometimes. You just hop on, like hope that you're going to I did that once. Like I was going to 13 and then it just rode up to 12. I was like, oh, that worked out perfectly. I just like hopped on,
Right, but but getting that often can work.
I didn't ask anyone anything.
That can work going up. It doesn't always work going down.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Well, going down is easy though in
the stairs.
stairs. It's going up that's
Okay, it's easy for you in stairs. You don't have a baby carriage,
Right,
a stroller.
exactly.
You don't have your leg in a cast. You don't, right? I mean,
Right,
so
right.
exactly.
But going up and I was like running late, so.
Again, the cases are all different, and the elevator, I think it's a low threshold to begin with. I don't think pushing the elevator button is a terribly severe Shabbat violation anyway. So but there are other, like if you're in.
Right, baby carriages are hard.
If you're hospitalized on Shabbat, they ask you to sign lots of papers. So some of those things, look, we violate Shabbat to save life, so they're not going to operate on you to whatever. Take out your appendix or everything, and so you sign on the form, it's not a problem, but they also ask you to sign the, please sign, the HIPAA thing, and they ask you to sign the, I acknowledge that you're going to bill me, right, you sign that, they ask you to sign lots of things. So at the end of the day, they won't treat you until you sign, so you sign on Shabbat, but a lot of these forms are kind of ancillary to actual medical care, so if you could sign with your left hand, you sign just an X instead of your full name, these are always, again, to avoid the actual full biblical Shabbat violation, these are also, recommended things. The sign to which TV channel you want on, right? All these things, things that are not necessarily so important, they still ask you to sign lots of papers and that stuff.
Because there's like a thing that you can sign, like a one letter, or just like one little, like it isn't like there's, you can.
Often, yeah,
Yeah.
like an X, right? Or something
Like an
just
X,
like,
yeah,
yeah,
so-
sure, that's fine. The biblical definition of writing on Shabbat is 2 letters.
Oh, 2 letters.
So if you can write 1 letter, you haven't violated Shabbat in the biblical, they haven't reached that threshold. Okay, so what do I want to say? Muktzah. So when Rambam writes about muktzah, this restriction against moving things that have no Shabbat use, he says that the rabbis added this category to Shabbat observance because they realized that Shabbat had become too easy, meaning Jews had moved from farms to cities at some point in Jewish history, from post-biblical period, Talmudic period. Some Jews stopped being primarily farming people and become urban people, merchants and artisans or whatever. And therefore, many of these melachot, like we never did. Like, when was the last time any of you plowed? Right? Right? Probably in weeks. Okay? Or threshed, or winnowed. Okay? Okay? So weeks and weeks. Maybe you've never winnowed. Okay? So therefore, Shabbat, the rabbis realized would be too similar to the regular day of the week. It needs to be distinct. It needs to be different. And so they said, okay, let's not touch money. Let's not touch tools. Let's make the day more different. Because in our urban context, the actual biblical restrictions don't make Shabbat different enough. This, I think, is very, very relevant to modern Shabbat. Because 150 years ago, 200 years ago, the rabbis were confronted with electricity, and they had to figure out how to evaluate it in the context of Shabbat. So some rabbis said electricity is fire. You turn on a switch, the electric current going through the wires is a form of fire, and just so we don't light fire, we don't transfer fire, we don't burn anything on Shabbat, we don't use electricity. The problem with that is, what's the problem with that theory?
They use for the fire.
The problem with that is that electricity is not fire, actually. It's quite it isn't. That's not what it is. It's a stream of electrons flowing through current. So that's not what it is. Others said the completion of an electric circuit is like completing a tool. Okay, you turn the switch, a circuit is completed, and now I've built something. Now I have an operational thing. The problem with that, this is a very great, the Chazon Ish, a great 20th century rabbi from Lithuania, moved to Israel, died in 1955, I believe. This was his theory. So he thought any time you use an electronic device, anytime a circuit is completed, that's a biblical violation of Makah Patish, of completing the final hammer blow, the thing that transforms something from unusable to being usable. And it's a biblical violation anytime a circuit is completed. The problem with that is, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who another great Israeli rabbi who died in 1995, he said, well, if I shut the door, which is like, you wouldn't say I built a wall, right? I just closed the door. And now I open the door, like I'm opening and closing the door, I'm not building and demolishing a wall, I'm just opening and closing a door. And so an electric circuit is meant to be open and closed. I'm not completing anything. Similarly to the way that it's entirely permissible on Shabbat to open and close a folding chair. I'm not building a chair. I'm operating a folding chair, not constructing a chair. I didn't just demolish a chair right now. I just folded it up to put away. Okay, so Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says there is no biblical violation per se in the use of electricity, other than the thing the electronic device does. So if you have an electronic lawnmower, okay, the lawnmower is chopping grass and is cutting things. That is a violation. That's a biblical prohibition on Shabbat. But just the fact that I'm turning it on and operating it, that's not the violation of Shabbat. The violation of Shabbat is the thing that it does. So if you have an incandescent bulb, which mostly don't exist anymore, remember the old-fashioned, non-energy efficient light bulbs with the filament inside. You turn one of those on, that's probably a biblical violation of Shabbat because you're heating up a filament until it glows. That is like burning. Very similar enough that that's a problem. But if you have a fluorescent bulb or an incandescent bulb or a telephone or a radio or a computer, nothing's burning. The device itself isn't necessarily causing any Shabbat violation. There's no malacha that's being performed. What then is happening? Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says there's a universal custom amongst Sabbath-observant Jews. From the time of electricity was invented until today, not to operate electronic devices on Shabbat, and that's why we don't do it. Which means that the threshold, if you broke your leg and you don't want to spend Shabbat all alone in your apartment for 25 hours, you want to go to shul, you want to have lunch with somebody, you want to go outside, so take your elbow, push the button. I think that makes sense. Or if you are traveling through a dangerous area and you're delayed, you're going to be late, you're going to be worried about you, you can call home. You call ahead, get on the phone and say, I'm okay. I'm just late, don't worry about me. Don't send a search party looking for me, which occurred in Israel on a number of occasions. So the threshold is relatively low because there's no actual biblical violation, according to this way of understanding. But I think it's so important to maintain that kind of sense of prohibition, because we don't, most of us, right, city dwellers, we don't plow, we don't sow, we don't reap, we don't winnow, we don't heap, we don't thresh. What we do during the week is use electricity, we use our smartphones, and we use our computers, and we turn on off lights. And if we're truly trying to create that sanctuary in time, we're trying for one day a week to live in the world as God created the world and as we have transformed the world, and then just to stop on Friday, like the world exists now. God made it this way, and we've created and built and transformed, and now for one day a week we inhabit the world rather than transform the world. Not using electricity is really, really important. Yes?
What's the opinion on electronic medical devices or stuff?
So that would be more lenient, right? Because the threshold is, it depends what the device would be. If you like something which is necessary for your health and your doctor's orders, like we violate, you can violate Shabbat in a clear-cut biblical fashion if it's medically necessary. Like you can light a fire if you need to make some medication, or you can do surgery, right, if it's necessary to preserve human life. Something that's a little bit more, like let's say, some people have devices like breathing, like they sleep with like special masks to keep them from like sleep apnea and stuff like that. So I think that's, I'd say speak to your local rabbinic authority, but the grounds for leniency would be you're not taking this for fun, you're taking it because the doctor has felt this is going to preserve your life and preserve your health, and therefore you should take that seriously. I think there might be some things which you wouldn't do if like the doctor says 3 or 4 times a week do this, so don't do it on Shabbat. But if you're supposed to, like every night when you go to sleep, like put on this mask because we think it's going to keep you alive and keep you healthy, then I think you should take that seriously.
So I asked because the device that I do for work, it's hearing. It's not you're gonna die if you don't wear it. But I've seen just the gamut of opinions from parents and recipients.
Sure. You make.
So I'm just curious.
What do you?
Cochlear implants.
Cochlear implants. So aren't those surgically?
It's surgically implanted, but it's an outside. So once the outside attaches, that starts the current.
Oh, interesting. So according to the opinion of the Chazon Ish, you wouldn't be able to wear one on Shabbat, nor would you be able to speak to someone wearing one on Shabbat, right? Because according to the lenient position of some Arbach, you'd be allowed to wear one and to speak to someone wearing it, obviously. I would say that it's interesting. The prevailing custom in Orthodox communities is to be lenient about hearing aids, but to be strict about microphones in synagogues, which is really interesting because it's exactly the same thing, more or less, right? A hearing aid is a really small microphone. So it's sort of interesting how history turned out that way, that we're lenient with hearing aids, we're strict about microphones. Probably the 1950s, like battle between Orthodoxy and conservative Judaism, has a lot to do with it, where this became one of the defining issues of Orthodoxy. We don't have microphones in our synagogues, and so we don't have microphones in our synagogues, but okay, here's an individual who needs a hearing aid, so we'll study a little bit more and we'll come up with a lenient position. So that's sort of an interesting anomaly in the way we practice Jewish law. It doesn't have to be an anomaly. You could say that for an individual who has this need to hear, we're going to embrace a lenient opinion. For a congregation which could just stop talking and listen to what's going on in shul, we'll do without the microphones.
It could also be dangerous for that person not to have.
It could also be dangerous. You're walking around the street, that's true. Cars are honking, you don't see your car, you're traveling. It's a very good point. It's a very fair point.
The way I see it, parents of infants with it, though, they will put it on. It's on before Shabbos starts, but then once Shabbos starts, they take it off.
Interesting.
And then it just goes in a corner until it
dies.
Look,
I think the plugging in and the that all is more significant halakhically, right? As opposed to just operating it. If you those Orthodox synagogues that have microphones, it's the microphone is turned on before Shabbat, kept under lock and key, so no one can adjust it in any way over Shabbat. And it's very different. Whereas the plugging in and the tuning and the adjusting is a more serious halakhic violation than the actual use of the microphone. Because that is the microphone, that's the final Right? Turning something non-operational to operational is a biblical violation. So set up your sound system is more serious than actually using the sound system. So I can understand how parents would be. Okay. Maybe we'll pause. Any other questions, comments? Okay, people are arriving from Mincha. Everyone's welcome to stay for Mincha. I think next time we'll start going through like malacha by malacha. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the ones that you never do, but we'll spend enough time on the ones that we do in our daily lives to make sure we can avoid doing them on Shabbat and sort of learn about them in a basic way. Then we may not meet again for a while because we have a whole bunch of holidays coming up. So, and then there's a Tuesday I'm going to be away. So maybe if all of you are on the synagogue mailing list, you all can check it right. If you just wait until you see it now, so that next week can quickly, let's see. Okay, next Tuesday is not going to work. The 15th is Rosh Hashanah. The 22nd is Yom Kippur, the Erev Yom Kippur. That's not going to work. The 29th is the middle of Sukkot. Into October 6th. October 6th is Simchas Torah. October 13th, I'm away for the day of the conference. October 20th, okay. October 20th, okay? We'll meet at 7 o'clock, is that okay?
Yeah.
October 20th. I hope to see you all before then, all of our holidays, okay? Okay. Great. October 20th, we'll start at 7 o'clock. Okay. All right, have a great rest of your day, and if you want to come back to Mincha, I'd love to have you there.